when I moved here, there was a time where there was this guy that was sober a long time, took some of us gay guys that wanted to do it, and we would go to LA County Hospital. And they put all these gay men that were dying in this ward where nobody would touch them. So we'd sit next to them, we'd pull the chair up next to them and just hold their hand or be as affectionate as they would allow or whatever. And I remember sitting there holding these guys' hands and talking to them and loving them. And they were just so grateful for it, and kissing them on the forehead and just telling them they're going to be okay.
So tell me your story a little bit, David. Where'd you grow up?
Northern California, San Jose.
Mm-hmm.
Are we starting?
Yes.
Okay.
What was your family like?
I'm one of 6 kids. I'm number 5 out of the 6. My parents got married, and I don't know how many years they were married before they started having children. And they had 6 kids in 6 years. And 3 girls, then 3 boys, an older brother. And then, an hour before we were born, my mother found out she was having 2 because this was 1960, and they didn't have ultrasounds. And
You're
she's
a
like,
twin.
thank God there's 2.
You're a twin.
Yeah. What?
You're a twin.
I'm twin. I was, yeah. Or I am. He's passed on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But, yeah, so.
How would you describe your childhood in general?
A lot. I mean, the names Rebecca, Lou, Deborah, Ann, Rachel, Lynn, Stephen, John, David, Paul, Jonathan, Peter. So there was a little bit of church. But my parents were pretty good because we went to 2 Lutheran churches that were pretty conservative. And then eventually my mother took us to a more liberal Lutheran church because the things that she was sort of involved in at the time, like she was marching for civil rights in the 60s. And my dad was actually working the protest, and he was a truck driver, but he was doing a reserve cop. And he's like, Helen, better be careful. I'm going to take you in tonight. And she's like, you go do what you got to do, Bill, and I'm going to go do what I got to do. And that's how we grew up. And so he stopped because they wanted him just to hit people randomly, and he wouldn't do it. But we grew up with, my mother doing and I listened to Cesar Chavez one time, and there was this little boy, and I was sitting next to her. She drug all of us to go listen to this guy, and I'm like, I'm hungry. I want to go. And she's like, who is this? She goes, Cesar Chavez, be quiet. And so we grew up with this awareness of society. And my parents weren't, I guess my mother was very liberal. My father was moderate, medium liberal. But, we grew up with that. We grew up with a lot of church, grew up with a lot of good food. We grew up with a lot of untreated alcoholism. Both my parents' fathers were alcoholics. So that trickled in. And 5 of us 6 kids ended up being alcoholics. So those kind of personalities were in the house,
Do you think the addiction that runs in your family is
genetic? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I know with the information that I have now over the years, alcoholics have a predisposition towards alcoholism. Those of us that, it doesn't do the same thing in our body that it does for other people. Some people drink themselves into alcoholism and do drugs into addiction, but most people, like the minute they do it, they're like, oh,
this is for me.
I was 12, you know what I mean? So, but I grew up in a house where, very structured. Mom was German and Dad was Spanish and Italian. His mother was Irish, sort of old school, a place called Half Moon Bay in Northern California on the coast. And we were one of the 5 founding families of Half Moon Bay. We had Mexican land grants before it was even a state.
Wow.
So there was a lot of history there. And then they met and got married, and then they went to San Francisco, had the 3 girls, went to Northern California a little bit further, and had my brother Stephen, and then got pregnant with, which would be the twins. And then actually my mother had all 6 of us on her own for like 6 months because my dad had gotten a job in San Jose. During the week, he'd go over there to Half Moon Bay. And my mother's 3 hours away, so he would only go up there on the weekends. So I come from a family where there was a lot of hard work. Both my parents were pretty smart. My dad had 11 scholarships to go away to school, but his parents were like, Billy, who's going to take care of it? He was the oldest boy, so they didn't want him going far, so he didn't do anything. And then my mother eventually went back to school to be a nurse. When we were she started once when we were when when Jonathan and I were like still in high chairs. Because she talked about when she came in one time and Dad was switching the trays of food, because I loved vegetables and salads, and my brother liked meat and potatoes. So he would just switch the plates, and he goes, well, everything's getting eaten, you know? And my mother's like, ugh. And my twin brother never had a strong palate for food and an adventurous one for a while. But I always ate everything. But then her books were stolen, so she couldn't do it. And then she waited again until she was like 39. Went back to school, became a nurse, and, had that career for a long time.
And drugs became a thing for you at what age?
12. So I'm the youngest, and we always had cocktail hour. We always had cocktail hour and salami and cheeses and crackers and all this other stuff. So there was always sort of that feeling around, and it was the 60s, and 70s. And my parents split up the year of 73. I was 12. My mother's sister had died of cancer, Aunt Tona. And that would leave a hole in her soul, and it just really sort of killed her. And she was sort of cleaning house with all these people she was really in a lot of grief. I think they were pretty close. And she was only 36, and my mother had just turned 40. And my parents got in a fight, and Dad went over to Little Half Moon Bay and stayed there. And then my mother worked graveyard shift at the hospital. Story makes me laugh. So my brother Stephen was growing marijuana plants in the neighbor's backyard across the street, who was supposed to be my mother's best friend, Carol. And my mother went to work, and Stephen and all of his buddies went around the neighborhood, pulled up all the marijuana plants in her backyard and around the area, and then brought them home. And somebody got them some beer too. They got Mickey Big Mouths. And so I started drying the pot, and I was making brownies, and then I started drinking. I was like on my third or fourth Mickey Big Mouth, and I was stoned and drunk and made the brownies, and then I got the munchies because I always got hungry when I got stoned. And so I'm eating Oreo cookies and drinking milk, and then I just threw it all up and passed out. And that was 12. At 12. I mean, my response to doing was always more, And the next morning we woke up, and my mother's at the counter, and we're like, oh shit, how many of those did you eat? 2 or 3. She ate the last of the brownies. We're like, we called my sister Becky, who had moved out. Becky was becoming school to be a nurse too. It was her idea first, actually, to be a nurse, and my mother just took the idea and ran with it because she was an adult. And Becky's like, you little bastards, I told you not to do anything stupid. So we had to stay there with my mother and put a mirror under her nose and make sure she didn't die. And she woke up like 13 hours later and was like, I'm hungry. We're like, bet you are. We gave her a TV tray of food and put on Star Trek for her. And we're like, this is crazy. But that's how it started. And that summer, eventually my dad came back, and told my brother Stephen and all of his buddies, fun's over. And then when I started school at 13, junior high school, it was 7 to 9 and then 10 to 12 in Northern California. And I was high every day. You can get pot much easier than alcohol. I mean, we did take orange 7-Up to school, and they weren't even fucked. Like, we're in the middle of the quad drinking orange 7-Up, and nobody's paying attention. We're like, it's screwdrivers. But yeah. But that summer, there's something significant that sort of happened I think why I got into it was just a series of circumstances. You know what I mean? I fell asleep during a sex education film in my last part of 6th grade. And I fell asleep, and I dreamt about having sex with my coach and all of my buddies on the team, or some of them. And I woke up and went, oh, that's what that is. Wow, okay. So I just sort of put that away. Between that and my parents splitting up and then having access to it, I was never effeminate, but I was an artist, and I was 10, I knew I was going to do hair. I was playing with my cousin's hair, my grandparents' house in Half Moon Bay, and I was obsessed with Raquel Welch because she just had this beautiful face, And I started playing with my cousin Jackie's hair. And I'm like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. And my grandmother's like, boys don't do hair. I said, well, men don't do hair. I said, well, this man's going to do hair. And then my dad came back because he was gone and kicked my ass for talking back to grandma. But I think he was embarrassed. Later on in the story, I'll tell you why all of that played out the way that played out. But I was like, oh, I'm going to do it. So I've never wanted to do anything else but do hair, you know. And then at 13, I wanted to do hair in Beverly Hills. So I'm fortunate because I do something I love. But I was always an artist. I was drawing and painting, you know. So doing hair was pretty normal for me, you know, and being creative and all that. I went through school, and I'm not dumb. I just it was boring to me. I thought, I'm going to be a singer, because I started singing, too, in junior high school. And I realized I had this really big voice. I could have studied opera, but I wasn't disciplined enough. And that lifestyle is very limited. So I knew I didn't want to do that. And then I liked acting, so I wanted to do that. So, of course, when I finally got sober, I mean, I went through school being plays and choir. But when I got sober, that's why I moved here, you know.
And the drugs were a thing for you for how long?
Till 23. So.
How bad did it get?
Pretty bad. So throughout high school, I was high every day. Like from 13 to 23, I didn't draw a sober breath, not one day. There was... Might as well just tell the truth. So, at 16, I went on a cruise with a girl who was from junior high school, was a year below me. She went on this bay cruise, and she had this guy. I saw this guy on the cruise, you know, and you know, I gave him my number, and his boyfriend called me, who was pretty effeminate, and my parents were away on a trip in Spain, and my brother Steven, his friend, my sister Rachel, and this girl, Laura Zarati, who used to hang out with us after the pizza parlor. We'd go to her house after and party for a while. She knew that I was gay because I had told her. And this guy calls, and Steven gets off the phone and goes, David's not gay, is he? And she's all, So I get home and he kicks my ass. His friend has to pull him off me. And my parents get back from Spain. And, you know, my dad gave me this weird hug. I said, what the fuck's wrong with this? And then I go to say hi to my mom, and she takes my stomach and twists me and pushes me in the other room and says, I know where you're going and what you're doing. I'm going to call the cops and all the guys if you don't stop. Now, what I was doing was, had they asked me, my mother asked me what was going on, I don't think I was aware that I had been raped the year before. I didn't realize that until I was 18 years sober, sitting in therapy. Because what happened to me at 15 with this 23-year-old, I didn't even know it could happen. But I was just drunk and high enough, and I found this house that the guys used to buy us beer. It was a couple streets over, and I went over there at 15 in a tight little tank top and some cut-off corduroy shorts, and I was a cute little thing, and on my 10-speed, and you know, I just happened to be taken advantage of. But I was drunk and high, and after that, I thought, what the fuck just happened to me? And I went home and took a shower and put on, you know, flannels and jeans, and went out and got high with my friends, because none of my friends knew anything. And I was 15, and there was nobody to talk to about it, you know. I think that was the summer. My parents took my, was I 15? I think so, before high school. My parents took my twin brother and I to Kansas City. Now, before I got on the plane, I got high with my brother Steven, and he's like, put the Visine in now, because I would always my eyes would get so red. He's like, you're blowing it, because I get stoned and walk in the house as a teenager and go to the fridge, and he's like, you're blowing it. Go put some Visine in your eyes. You know, so my dad always knew. And I put dope in my sock, and that was 1976 or so. I could have had some real consequences, you know, for myself and my parents, but I just put my dope in my sock, which where I always kept my pot. I was stoned and got on the plane and went to Kansas City with my family, my mom and my dad, to visit one of my aunts and stuff. And, you know, there was this one dinner where we had to put on gold jackets. Now, when my aunt died, my dad took my twin brother and I to Mervyn's to get clothes. And I said, how much money can I spend? He gave me $1 amount. I said, okay, I'll be back. It was the 70s. Like, bell bottoms were just starting. I found these really great, you know, sort of beige bell bottoms. I found some chocolate brown and beige platform shoes and this Kiana, chocolate brown peach beige shirt with big collar and great sleeves. And I came back and my brother Jonathan starts crying. He goes, how come he looks better than me and we have the same amount of money? And I looked down and I went, I'm good at this shit. Like I realized then at 12, I can put clothes together. I knew I had an artist's eye, but I didn't know that I could do it with clothes that well. And so, we fast forward to Kansas City, we go into this restaurant and we have to put on these gold jackets because you have to have a jacket at the dinner table. And Jonathan and I are sitting across from each other and everything, and I'm just like, ugh. We're like, whatever. So this waiter comes up to the table and he's just like, so, how you doing? So. Obviously very gay, and I'm just like, oh. I wonder how this is going to play out in front of all the adults. Because I'd been around gay guys, but not with other adults that aren't gay around. I was with a house full of guys who were all gay. And he leaves the table, and my dad's like, well, he's sure light on his feet. And my twin brother and I look at each other, and in that moment, we both knew we were gay. I looked at him, he looked at me, and I went, oh, you too. Because he had a girlfriend, and I had girlfriends, but we're just like, oh. So we never said anything, never talked about it. To the day he died, we never talked, oh, are, and we just knew, right?
And you weren't identical?
No, fraternal. And, it wasn't being much later where, so I went through high school, and I was, voted most talented, best smile, all out of the crap in junior high school or whatever, in junior high school, I'm one thing and the other. And I had this choir teacher named Connie Shelby, and she was pretty gorgeous. I loved pretty girls. I'd walk up to girls and go, okay, come here. That green eyeliner, it has to go. Stop it right there. So do this and do that. And then it's, and they'd be like, oh my God. I said, I know. Flip your head upside, tease the root, spray it, flip it back, now spray it, now you're good. Because I'd be doing, nobody would let me touch them. When my aunt died, my two cousins, Julie and Jill Marie, would alternate weekends sometimes with us. And they were my live guinea pigs to do hair and makeup on. I said, come on, let me do your eyes and tweeze your eyebrows and put some makeup on. We'll go to R-rated movies and smoke cigarettes. And like, okay. And sneak them into the theater, let me sneak into the other theater. Just bad influence from the beginning. But, so I always knew what I wanted to do, but nobody would let me touch them yet. And so I saw this choir teacher, this lady walking across the quad. I was like 16. I'm like, God, she's gorgeous. Blonde, beautiful, great body. And so I chased her, and I'm like, what do you do? She goes, I teach choir. And I said, I sing. And she literally rolled her eyes. She goes, oh. And I went, did you just roll your eyes at me? Now, she didn't know that I was in junior high school, got most talented, that I was already in the church choir, that I was already, So I was like, what period? She goes, second. I said, I'll be there. And I go, where? In the music room, in the back. I said, okay. So I went to my history teacher, who I knew was gay, who knew I was gay. I said, Folletta. I said, Mr. Folletta, I'm going to have to switch his classes up because I'm going to go do choir. He goes, really? I said, yes. So he, years later, I would meet him in the gay bar. I'd see him and say, oh, there you are. And I was way underage when I was going. And so anyway, I go back, and we have a first day at the choir class. We're sitting there, we're all getting orientation. Second day, we're all singing. And she stops the first sopranos, the altos, the tenors, and she stands next to me. And she's like, wow, you really can sing. And I said, well, I told you I could, She sung opera. Both of her parents, her father studied at La Scala Opera House in Italy. Her mother's a coloratura, which is higher than Mariah Carey. And she just had an amazing voice. She's very talented. So she was that one teacher in school. I tried not to screw up completely because of her. I didn't want to disappoint her. And that probably saved me. And it would be years later, when I was sober and I was driving, my family had migrated from San Jose to Vegas in 2000. And I called her one time and I said, I got to tell you, you're the reason I didn't really go off the edge in high school. And she said, no. I said, no, you were the teacher that made me feel heard, understood. Because at this point, after my mother did that and twisted my stomach and told me all that, I thought I'm alone because I was sort of my mother's favorite. Not sort of, I was. and which didn't always play well in a family of 6 kids, but I thought I'm alone. So from 16 to 18, my drinking and using escalated ridiculously. By the time I'm 18, my parents are not letting me have a cocktail in the house. They're like, no. So I went to my ex-girlfriend's sister's wedding, and it was an open bar. And I was like, yeah, So I don't remember a lot of it because I drank to blackout a lot. And I'd gone in the garage, I guess, and was peeing my pants, and my twin brother had to bring me home. And I remember sitting in the car, he's like, I can't believe you did this, David. And I'm like, whatever. And then I put me to bed, and I guess I got up in the middle of the night and passed out. My dad had me put me back to bed in my waterbed. It was 1979. And he comes in that day, and he goes, you got 2 weeks, you're out of here. And I thought it was him, because he was pretty violent growing up with me, to the point where I had nightmares until I was like 36. But I wouldn't really find out until later on why that all went down. But that probably saved my life, because my mother would have enabled me to death. My father's like, no, you're not having this shit in my house. Not you doing this. So I got kicked out of the house, and I was working at the pizza parlor, and I told my sad story to this couple gay guys came walking in, and I thought, well, I'll see if I can work, and told them my sad story. And of course, they lived down the street, and I moved in with this one guy who had just come out of the closet. He had a little kid, and blah blah blah. He's like 31, and I'm 18, and and I moved right in, and we ended up being just friends. But and then I was living in this house full of gay guys that were just a mess. They were messy, and so I've been paying. And one time I had to pay the rent on my own for everybody, So I got to come back home, and then I was doing really well. And it talks about it in recovery, where you build it all up and tear it all down. So I was doing really well. I was working a couple of jobs. I was, cleaning. I was a house cleaning service where a couple of us would clean like 3 or 4 houses a day, and then I'd work at this clothing store called The Limited, which is a women's clothing store, but I was the only guy I ever worked there. And some of the girls I went to high school with, one of my ex-girlfriends, Kim Sue, and Teresa. And then one night I came home, and my dad's like, I said, I'm going to go out. He's like, why don't you just stay home? And I just sort of said, I really want to go out. Because I had friends of mine, because back in the day what happened is an older group of gay men would sort of show the younger gays what to do. Like, this is how you have a dinner party. This is what you wear. This is what you do. This is the music. These are the movies. There was no LGBTQ support group. You had some old queens that were showing you what to do. So I was going to go hang out with them. And I just bought this car for my grandmother. So I said, no, I got to go out. So I go there, and I'm downing alcohol like water, to the point to where when I went down the street and totaled my car and 2 other parked cars, my blood level was 0.35. Not 0.35, but 0.35. 0.4 is unconscious, 0.5 is dead. So I, I don't remember, because I didn't have a seatbelt, and I totaled my car and 2 other parked cars. And not this scar, but there's another scar that was right up here where my hairline used to be. And I came out of the blackout in the jail cell, and it wasn't until years later when I had a session with a medium, a friend of mine who's sober too, and he goes, you were bad. And I said, well, darling, that could be good. What do you mean? He goes, no, that car accident. I said, I know. I don't know how I lived. He goes, Spirit kept you alive because they knew you'd be helping people. Because that's all I do nowadays, pretty much. But I came out of that, and I got kicked out of the house again. And I wasn't really allowed back in, really, for good. And then I found sugar daddies, from then on. I found something. There was a point when I was 20, when I got kicked out of the house again. At that point, I went and found a job in Los Gatos, was doing makeup, blah, 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 all this other stuff, and going to bars and lying about my age, and then got, busted and got 86 from some bars. But, eventually would just find guys that would take care of me. My drinking, I drank around the clock, because when I was 20, I'd gotten kicked out of the house again or staying with some friends, and I'd lost a job because I was walking across the lunch room in, what was the name of the restaurant? The Seasons in Los Gatos, very fancy. It's like Beverly Hills, all these, women, ladies who lunch, and they're empty wine glasses, and it sounded like wind chimes. And I'm just like, oh, and I lost my job because I was always shaking, or I came with, stamps from the bar from the night before, obviously not showered, probably reeking of booze, and that's how it was. It just, yeah. So eventually I ended up in San Francisco. I did have a heterosexual slip when I was 21. This blonde girl, she looked like a little Barbie. I walked in to do makeup for this play, and I look at this girl, and I'm like, oh my God, she's so pretty. And we started, we're watching this play we were doing makeup for, and I started dancing. She's like, I was watching your butt move, and I thought, that boy's cute, I don't want him. And so, we wanted to go party. I said, well, let's go to this bar, Desperados. And she's always gay. So we ended up hanging out, and then in a blackout, I told her I was going to marry her. I'd taken her up to my brother's house up in the hill, and then I didn't see her for a while. And then we bumped into each other at the same bar again one time. She was wearing this black taffeta off the shoulder cocktail dress, and I'm wearing, Castro drag, which is flannel shirt and jeans. And we ended up dancing together all night, and I brought her back to where I was staying, and the guys wake up and go, no, girls. And I'm like, shh, don't listen to them. So we walked around town and found a place to live. They walked into this one girl's, had this store called a stationery store. And there's this Paper Moon products, which were these Art Deco stationery, which was amazing in the 80s, remember? And Nancy said, I have a place, so Kim and I, let's go move in. So, we did. My family was so like, what are you doing? And we had a great time, eating Quaaludes, drinking wine, fucking every day. I mean, we got ready for the night before, going out all night. And she's like, and then, I remember doing her hair for her wedding, and I was sober. And she's like, it was so hard to lug you up those stairs after you've been drinking all night. And then my brother, we'd see up the gay bar, Jonathan. We're like, we knew it. But I would get too drunk, so they'd go stick me in the car, and they'd stay inside and drink and could do coke all night because they didn't want to waste the coke on me. So that's that. What else? So
you became a hairstylist?
So the last sugar daddy in San Francisco knew. So I ended up there because I was going up there with some friends. I made kicked out of the house again and staying with some friends. We're supposed to go to this bar called the Trocadero. Got an accident on the way up there, go to this bar. I'm with these two guys, Gene and Stan, and I sort of lost them because I met this guy and we were doing MDA. And I did like 3 hits in like an hour and a half, which is like 6 hits of ecstasy on it. And I was really high. And I couldn't even stand up the next day. And so I ended up there. And then this guy goes, I know we can go talk to somebody where we might be able to stay, because that's how I lived. We're here now. What are we going to do now? I mean, it was just, for years I lived like that. It wasn't anything new to me. I look at that now and think, that's insane. You don't know where you're going to live, where are my belongings? Well, whatever, we'll get some new stuff. It's just that kind of thing. Wherever I can land, wherever I can stay, who I can use. And so we go to this house on Lately, and it was Twin Peaks and Noe Valley sort of meet. And there's this great big house, and they knew John, his name is Johnny Webb, and he knew this whole group of guys from Modesto, these gay guys. And they're all living in this house. So we go there to visit the next day, or a day or two after. And then we start talking and stuff, and they have an extra room, so Johnny and I go move in there. And there's this guy, Chuck, who had a lover named Steve. Carlos lived there, this guy named Carlos. And then there was another couple, Bobby and George. And then, they let us stay there, but Chuck sort of took a liking to me. And then he somehow got Johnny out of the picture. And then that's right. I came out of a blackout in jail again. I left the Midnight Sun drunk. It's a video bar in the Castro. And I'm like, God, I need some blow because I'm too high. And that's the last thing I remember. I woke up at the top bunk of San Francisco County Jail, and I knew the guy across the way. And I'm like, oh, hi. What did we do? And so I think I ended up going back to San Jose. And then that summer, I was just pretty much partying all summer. And then I was with my ex-girlfriend, Kim, and her new roommate, Tharea, who I knew from high school. And we were drinking by the pool all day, and then we're going to get ready to go out that night. And I'm by myself in this chair and the TV and stuff, and they hear this thud. And I guess I'd gotten up and hit my head on the chair somehow and ripped my ear. And so they go rush me to the hospital, and I called Chuck. Because I'd seen him during that summer. And he had lost weight because he was heavy, and he had lost weight and did all this stuff, and he was trying to like get me to, win me. And I was like, oh, no. And then by this point I thought, well, this is, I can't handle this. I need to find, because I would just find somebody else to use. So I called him, and he came swooping down to sweep me back up to San Francisco. San Francisco was only like an hour away. And my grandma was like, you don't have to do this. I said, no, I have to. And I did it, but I knew when I was going back to that house that I was going to go in the master bedroom, and it required me being his partner. And I wasn't in love with him, but I really think now is that relationship saved my life, because I'm sitting here HIV negative. And that was 82, 83, and 84 that I was in that house, before I was with him and after, and drunk and in San Francisco. And, I like to say I was always faithful to him. Not so true. Well, before we got together, I was a little busy, but he kept a pretty tight leash on me, and he hated it because I would get up in the morning, and I had to drink in the morning because I shook too much, So they'd stop bringing a lot of alcohol in the house, and but I just woke up, I went to San Jose for Christmas in 83, and I was so bloated and so blown up. I mean, Chuck was feeding me so nobody would look at me, just to get me fat, and nobody would look at me. But I was still drinking too, and eating, and I was, and my parents finally told me, if you're drinking, don't come around us. And they never really said that. They didn't really let me stay. They would kick me out, but they never said, don't come around us. So that was that. I also, my brother's second wife, they were going to get married, and she needed a perm. So I said, I'll drive down to San Jose to do her hair, which is really like, give me the car, Chuck, and the keys, and I have a couple of days where I can really drink without somebody watching me. I hated that. So, of course, I got in the car. First thing, I stop at a liquor store, get a bottle, put it under the armrest, and head down to San Jose. It took me a minute to get to San Jose because I drank so much I had to get another bottle. And then I get to her and start doing her hair, and I stop in the middle to go get more alcohol. And that's the amount of drinking I was doing that day. To the point to right now, and I finished her hair, and I permed it. It was fine. But I went out that night, and I was driving back from the bar, this bar from San Jose, and I was driving, and I said, I had no control over the car. And I was like, God. And that's the last thing I remember. And then I woke up the next morning, and I went to go grab for the keys, and I was like, there's the keys, where's the wallet, where's the car? Oh, it's all there. And I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Now, I've come out of blackouts in jail twice. I've woken up next to people I don't even know, where I had to get up and get a piece of mail to find out where I am, then I have to find their liquor cabinet, because I'm not going to face the rest of this day sober. That's the way I lived for years. So it wasn't the worst day. I was just sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so first thing I did to go pour myself a drink, because I had to have it in my body. And then I go back, and my brother Stephen was living with my parents because he's getting married, he's saving some money. And I go back and I go, Stephen, do you have to take me somewhere for my drinking? He goes, oh, us Miramontes men are stronger than that. He's on the phone. And I said, oh, no, you don't understand. These are the words that came out of my mouth. I'm physically dependent upon alcohol in my body in order to function. He just went, I'll call you back. So he goes, you want me to roll some joints? I said, absolutely. So I went and I poured myself another drink, because I had already gotten on the phone, talked to Raleigh Hills. It was this inversion treatment where they make you drink and throw up and stuff. They went out of business. But so he gets in the car, and I have the directions, and I'm driving up there on the 101, and I'm like, oh, hold on. Okay, go, because I had double vision. That's how drunk I was. And I'm like, okay, go 2 more exits, and then, and that's how I walked into it. And then when I got there, they said, what's your drink of choice? I said, vodka. So they poured me a drink. I said, oh, this is going to be good. I didn't know they didn't want me to go into DTs, because you can die from detoxing off alcohol. And they said, do you have any problems? I said, no, I just have, sometimes my kidneys get really, because I was drinking so much, my kidneys were hurting at 23. I'm not the kind of alcoholic who lives. My drinking and behavior, people die. So, I always tell people, I go, the fact that I'm sitting here clean and sober and want to be is miracle enough. But
is that what happened to your brother?
No, my brother had AIDS, my twin brother.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And so, but he drank too, a lot. So I ended up going to Raleigh Hills, and then, Chuck, came to me, and I gave him the ring, and I was like, here, we're done. And then my dad, who was a Teamster, got me into a treatment center through his Teamsters. They paid for it, because back then the insurance didn't cover any of that stuff. So the Teamsters paid for my rehab, and I got into rehab, and, it was up in Tuolumne, which is, up in the middle of nowhere by Stockton. And, it was interesting. I mean, I knew I was an alcoholic. I just never wanted to stop, And so I went up there and I learned about alcoholism, And then when I came, so I was up there. In the first couple weeks, I was getting to know my counselor, Don, and there's other guy. And he was telling me about he's hanging out with these DJs and these clubs and blah, blah, blah. And I just went right over my head. And then we had family weekends. So my father, mother, and my brother Stephen and Rachel came to visit. And Debbie too, I think. Debbie and Lex both did. And my sister Becky, my oldest sister, was done. She was done with me. She's like, no, I'm not. We're going to give you some time before we'll see what happens here, which is good. Becky's good that way. She wasn't an alcoholic like the rest of us were. And so my mother's like, are you going to tell your counselor that you're gay? I said, oh, yeah, let me run right in there. But it's like, I'm in beauty school living in San Francisco. This man's trying to get a hold of me, sending me food. My favorite thing was these steamed pot stickers and plum sauce from the China Court restaurant in the Castro. And he sent me a big old box of them. He was just trying to, and my dad finally got on the phone with him and said, leave my son alone, he's trying to get sober. So he did. And, which I thought, yeah, Dad. And, so I finally go in there, I gotta be honest. So I go in there and I go, Don, I have to tell you something. So I walk in there and I sit down with him and I said, I got to tell you that I'm gay, and he's like, oh, okay, well, that's fine. I said, I just wanted to tell you, you need to know everything about me. And it was like a week or so later, he called me into his office. He goes, David, I have to talk to you about something. And I was like, oh. I walk in there, I sit down and I said, yeah? He goes, you were so honest with me. I'm going to be really honest with you, and you're the only person I've told. He goes, I'm gay too, and I'm going to find some gay meetings outside of the area that I go to. And this guy's sober a couple years, and then in that moment, I knew God had me. I knew I was going to be okay. I thought, oh, you can't make this up. You can't make this up, So, and then my parents weren't even sure if they wanted me back in the house. They're like, but I did. I went back home, and it was great for a while, really great. And then, of course, a lot of addicts and alcoholics like to get in relationships right away. And I started seeing people, and this one guy I saw, he was dating this girl who was gay, and they wanted to have a family. Well, this is way before people were doing it. And they were drinking and smoking dope, and I was like, I know I can't drink, but let me roll some of that. Because dope was like having a cup of coffee and smoking a joint. That's what I did in high school. In the 70s, I would throw some cross tops, which are speed, in my coffee, roll a joint, let my hair sort of air dry while I'm smoking a joint and drinking coffee. And when my scalp started to tingle, I'd go inside and blow dry my hair. Yeah. So I started smoking dope that summer. And then I just stopped because, my sobriety date's December 10th of 84. I just couldn't get high. Like, I would drink and all day and not get drunk. I would do coke and fall asleep. Like, my body was starting to not respond to the drugs and alcohol or respond in the other direction. So it wasn't until like 2 years later, I was talking shit in a meeting, and this dyke named Snoopy that used to carry a gun and ride a Harley, we were always a little, she talked really, yes. And she goes, I'm taking you to an NA meeting. And I was like, you know. So she took me, and I realized I wasn't clean and sober. And I went back to my meeting, my Monday night meeting, and I said, here's my chip. I don't have 2 years. I have a year and a half. So I'm going to, and then, and you know, I changed my date. I knew I wanted to, I put my name on a waiting list for beauty school too. You know, San Jose City College had a cosmetology department, and all the states in California, all the cosmetology departments in the state have state funded, so it's like a 2-year waiting list. And I'd already been halfway through school. Like I went to beauty school in San Francisco, I was halfway through, and it was going to be great. And then 6 months before we're starting, they're like, oh, well, you have to give up your hours or start all over. And I was like, Jesus Christ. So I started all over. But at that time, in '86, I'd moved out of the house again, like, you know, a year or so after being in my parents' house. And I just had to prove that I could do it. You know, my dad's like, so I'm working 4 jobs. I'm going to school 40 hours a week in beauty school and 4 meetings. And I think I even had a boyfriend at the time. And I think the 3rd time my dad came to start my car because I had left the lights on. This Chrysler Cordoba with Corinthian leather that I bought off of them. You know, he said, quit one job and move back home. So I did. And I always wanted to, I wanted to do hair in LA, and I was waiting to see what was going to happen. And I finished beauty school and I got my license. I had a friend down in Los Angeles. And he eventually got me a job down here. So like in '88, I decided to come down here, you know? And, you know, in '88, my father and mother got into this fight. My dad got cancer. I was getting ready to move to LA, and my dad's like, here's some money, go move. Because he didn't get to it, 11 scholarships. He didn't live his life. He lived for his parents, and then he got married, and all his kids, and his life has always been for everybody else. And this is where, after all this went down, I was like, oh. So my father got in a fight with my mom about this car that he wanted, this truck. My sister Becky told her husband, give him the money to get it. He did, got in a fight with my mom, moved out. Now, nobody's talking to my mom. I'm talking to my mom, I'm talking to my dad, I'm talking to my sisters. And then the cancer comes back later on that fall. And I said, Dad, you got to move back home. Because he moved in with my brother, stirred up too much shit there. Stephen moved, he got into his own place, blah, blah, blah. So I said, Dad, you got to go back home. Because I'd already talked to my mother, said, Mom, Dad needs to come back home. And Mom's like, you know, and I said, told my sisters, you go take care of Dad. They're like, of course. And I called Dad. I said, you got, you know, I remember being in the kitchen in Los Angeles. I was living off Barham in Lake Hollywood. And I was like, Dad, you got to go back home. He goes, you sure, Dave? And I said, yeah, I talked to everybody, it's good. And my sister Becky thought that he just decided to go do that. I said, no, because I moved down here and I got the job with this lady, and then a week later she quit. So I started walking around LA, and I'm like, I am not going back to Los Angeles or going back to San Jose. So I'm walking around Beverly Hills and I see this salon, Jose Barra. I said, well, let's go in there, see what happens. So I walk in there. I'm like, hey, do you need any help? They're saying, yes, come back in an hour. And I was, my hair was long. So I literally went home and I slicked it back in a ponytail and put on all black. And I didn't know that's the color of Beverly Hills, you know? And so I go back and I became Jose's assistant. So I went back to San Jose, and my brother Stephen threw me a going away party. And, you know, and my dad was there, and I said, Dad, I just don't, you know, that's when he gave me the money. He said, go live your life. And I was really grateful. Because when I got sober, my dad showed up. He's like, what do you need? Do you have a toothbrush? Do you have any money in your pocket? What do you need? And I was like, oh, forget all the other shit that happened. You're here now. Because, and I felt his love. I said, I don't care about all the rest of that. That's just, you know, and he's the one who you know, who would, my mother was already out sort of saving the world because she had involved in an AIDS group in like 81 or 82 in San Jose called Eris. And then in 85 05, they needed a new president for the California Nurse Association.
Did she do that because of your brother?
She thought, no, my brother wasn't diagnosed yet.
Oh, wow.
She thought I was going to get sick. So she told my dad, I got to get involved. David might need this. So, and she was a nurse and stuff, so she got involved with this group. My dad went with her to this heirs group, a couple of things, and came back and told my siblings, she's going to do this, you leave her alone to do this. And so, and then the California Nurse Association needed a new president. My dad's like, why don't you run? She goes, well, I can. He goes, you and your cronies are always bitching about everything. Why don't you run? She did, and she won. Now, I don't know if and then my mother ended up teaching HIV healthcare in 85 in this program called Train the Trainer, which taught doctors and nurses accurate HIV healthcare. So people were being left to die everywhere. Nobody would touch them. They wouldn't even hug us. People were afraid that you get it from hugging. And it's actually a hard virus to get. But so she got involved in all that. So my mother she didn't even make it to the going away party. She was off where, and so I come to Los Angeles and I start doing all this and I get this job with Jose. And it was pretty cool, back in the day. First client was Jacqueline Smith, Jacqueline, Farrah Fawcett, Raquel Welch. I remember blowing dry Raquel Welch going, oh my God, because I was so obsessed with her.
Really?
And Jose and Farrah got her to fight one day because he did something and she grabbed the scissors and cut her own bangs and walked out. And it was hilarious. And Elizabeth Taylor came in and she was dating Malcolm Forbes. She always hung around with all the queens. And then one night we permed Betty Davis's hair. Like we had to close the salon and permed it. And she's standing there with these cigarettes and these perm rods and this dress with those buttons on it. And I'm like, God, I wish I had a camera, And it was great. It was fun, And I would drive his Rolls Royce back and forth to Palm Springs when we did hair there. And he seemed to be really like me. And I think he liked me a little too much, but whatever. So we were working and stuff, and 6 months into it, Ali McGraw walked in one day, who, all the young kids, she's an actress, and she's like, oh my God, I picked up this suit from a party the night before and sort of shook it and then put it on. And I was 27. You wake up, everything's in its place. You're not swollen. Nothing's wrong. You're 27. So I'm standing there working, and she's like, oh, you look so good. And I said, oh God, he's going to hate it. Don't give me too much attention. He hated that. He goes to the front desk. He goes, he looks too elegant. He needs to look like an assistant. He only needs like a white uniform, like shampoo people. And I'm like, I didn't say that. I just said, I'm done. I'm not coming back. Because I'm 3.5 years sober. My dad has cancer. My first sponsor died. I'm watching all my friends die of AIDS. Do you think I give a shit about Beverly Hills? Really? Because I don't. I mean, it's fine, it's great, but I don't think one human being is really more important than another human being. I just don't believe that. I think everybody's life has value. And back then I really did too. And so I went off and I started putting a portfolio together to model. I had an acting coach and a singing coach, and I'm going to pursue this then. If this is hair in Beverly Hills, you can have it. And I would still go up in San Jose and do some clients. My brother Jonathan lived behind this lady who was actually working below me when I was doing makeup in Los Gatos, and she saw me running around drunk and half naked in Los Gatos. And her Vivian, really sweet lady, and he lived in her guest house, and I would go do hair in the courtyard in between. It's all these clients that I created because I was always hustling hair clients, and then I'd put them all together when I left, and I'd come up every 5, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, and do everybody's hair. And my brother's like, well, how much did you make? And I tell him, he goes, I should do hair. I said, no, that's pretty good. And so, I went up there and was doing hair and stuff, but it was sort of, and I met somebody in 89. And he followed me into the bathroom. He tried to follow me into the bathroom, but I locked the door. And I come out and I said, do you always follow boys into the bathroom? He goes, no, it's just cute ones. I said, oh, okay. So his name was Alan, and we ended up being together for like 4 years. But his roommate was this interior designer, was a few older than us, and then I ended up working at the Ralph Lauren store in Rodeo, and I was getting my Ralph ready one day, and I looked at this guy Hank, and I was like, oh shit. He goes, what? I said, I just thought you remind me of him. He goes, who? I said, my twin brother. You're a little older, like 12 years older. I said, but you guys are a lot alike. So I ended up fixing my brother up with Hank without telling Jonathan, because Hank wouldn't shut up about it. And so I finally had Johnny come visit, and I'm like, here. Johnny's like, is there anybody I can have a cocktail with? And I'm like, yeah. So they were together 20 years. The end of 89, my boyfriend's like, why don't you just go back to doing hair? You like doing hair. So in early 90, I worked for this lady, at Holloway in Los Angeles, this new salon. And then I walked into this other salon that I'm sort of the one on Cannon in Beverly Hills to visit a friend of mine, Angelo, who was a hairstylist. Now, all those celebrities would go between Angelo and Jose. So it was fun up there. You never who you're going to see and what's going on. And so I'm walking out of the salon, and this Dusty Fleming, who owned the salon, that's one who chased me out. And he goes, what do you do? And I said, well, I do hair. He goes, where? I said, oh, this girl, but she's a drunk and she's living out of the till and she's dating a rocker. It's not going to last. Well, why don't you come work here? I said, what do you want me to do? He goes, what can you do? I said, I can do everything. What do you want me to do? He goes, well, then do everything. So I find this redhead, and I came in, did her color, did her cut, did her makeup and style, everything. And so I started working for him. And then after a minute, he's like, because Dusty could cut anything. There's a guy, Michael Canali, who was downstairs, who did the best base colors. He ended up doing Jennifer Aniston's color. He's a good guy, great colors. And Angelo upstairs could do the best streaks and blow dries. So the three of them, I was like, just absorbed all that information. And I was already talented with hair and makeup, but I was just lucky to have three really good people in different things and learn from all of that. And then eventually Dusty's like, you need to be on the floor. And then eventually 13 years later, I took over the salon, But it was after I introduced Hank and Jonathan moved down here within a short period of time. But it was about 8 months after my father died. And Jonathan's living with Mom to save some money to come to Los Angeles. And they get a call. And they're like, is Bill Miramontes here? My mother's like, no, he isn't. They go, do you know where he is? He said, well, who is this? And he goes, well, it's a friend. And my mother's like, oh, well, he died. How? And my mother's like, who is this? And he goes, his lover. So my Latin Italian cowboy truck driver stud father, was a lot more like me than I thought. And it's interesting because, he was tall, good looking, blue eyes. If you took Paul Newman and John Wayne and put them together, that's what you'd get my dad. And really charming, talented, everybody loved him, and I'm glad that we had the 5 years together because he was my parrot for the last 5 years of his life. My mother was out doing her own thing, you know what I mean? And, I was working at Ralph Lauren and I had to go back and see him. I'd gone to see him and I said, I have to go back. And I remember I came back that Sunday night, crawled to bed next to him and talked to him for a little bit. And the next morning I get up and one of my sisters, Debbie's like, I need highlights. So of course I'm, grab my hands, put some, I'm always, girls know, like that one today, who just shows up at the salon. And because they want their hair done. And I throwing foils in Debbie's hair. My sister Becky, who was inside in the bedroom with my dad, goes, go call everybody. So I got the privilege of watching last breath go out of my father's mouth. And Becky was sitting behind him, and then she moved my mother behind him, and we were all standing there, and he had started to go, and the rattle and all that. And then all of a sudden, he just sort of looked up, opened his eyes, looked at all of us, he goes, I love you all very much. And then just closed his eyes, and he's died. And it was later on when I was with this boy, Alan, that I met. And I was laying there, and I started talking about it, and I started crying, and Alan started kissing away my tears, and I thought, oh, this is the one that's going to be special. So we were together 4 years. I don't think I've ever loved anybody as much as I loved Alan. But I was just so sad because I had just gotten my father, and then he was gone. And, my first sponsor died, and I was just like, but then I'm in LA and I'm doing hair and trying to be fabulous. And then one day my Jonathan's lover, Hank, says, you have to come and your mom's coming to visit. I called her and I went over to the house and he goes, And my brother Jonathan was really thin. And I knew the look. And so my mother was there and Hank was there, and we made an appointment with my doctor, who was Pacific Oaks Group, this group that was helping people with HIV, even though I'm not. I went to him because I knew him through my mom. And my mother had to go away to a convention. I said, I'll take him Monday morning. And I knew. I've been watching it for years. When I moved here, there was a time where there was this guy that was sober a long time, took some of us gay guys that wanted to do it, and we would go to LA County Hospital. And they put all these gay men that were dying in this ward where nobody would touch them. So we'd sit next to them, we'd pull the chair up next to them and just hold their hand or be as affectionate as they would allow or whatever. And I remember sitting there holding these guys' hands and talking to them and loving them. And they were just so grateful for it, and kissing them on the forehead and just telling them they're going to be okay. That opens up your heart and your soul in a way that nothing else does. It cuts away everything and levels the playing field. And I was very young when all this was going on. And so when I took Jonathan, I picked him up that morning. And we were very different. I'm out there, an artist, and he's, he would take things apart and fix them to see how they worked. I'm like, make this work, I'll make it look pretty. And and I got in the car and he started chatting. And I knew, and I just took him to the doctor's office, and I walked in and I looked at the doctors. He looked at me, and Jonathan walked past him, and I said, he's not good, is he? He goes, no. So I went back and I sat down and I was like, the confirmation. And I thought, how do I tell my mother? How do I tell my mother that what she's been fighting for years? So at this point, I think she might have been even on the Clinton's AIDS Advisory Board or was going to be on it. How do I tell her? So I made that phone call. And, it was touch and go with him for a minute. But because he was white, because his lover was a trust fund baby, had money, and my mother had access to all these doctors, he got the best care from the very beginning. He was diagnosed with 40 T cells the same week that Magic Johnson was diagnosed. And, he got better. They actually accidentally didn't know, they gave him this antifungal, which boosted the effectiveness of this other medication, this ACT that he had. And, it was a lot. But it was a couple years later, actually. They had moved to Laguna Beach from Los Angeles. Because most of Hank's clients were in Newport Beach and Orange County and stuff. And so they moved to Laguna Beach, which I loved because I was down there all the time. And one time, it was my mother and my brother Jonathan and I, we decided to watch Philadelphia together. And I remember telling him, I said, you are never going to be alone. And I knew because I'm sober and I'm a man that keeps my word and I love him beyond measure that was going to happen. And that's the way it was. He never, every time he was in the hospital, there was, so in 96, there's just first 6 months I counted how many people died. And it's the only time in all of the AIDS epidemic that I ever counted. And within 6 months, I lost 18 people that I knew. And I never counted after either. And I met somebody at the white party in Palm Springs, across the crowded dance floor on a Saturday. Oh, it's love. No, it was just great sex. And so I flew to Las Cruces, New Mexico a couple months later, loaded the U-Haul, put his Jeep on the back, and drove him across the middle of the desert in the middle of summer. I really am a lesbian in a gay man's body, and no joke. And so that lasted until like September. And then my mother was involved in another group, so the last full showing of the AIDS quilt, we went there. My mom and I went. And it was pretty cathartic for me because I lost so many people. I just started writing names on these. They had these blank panels and I could just write names. And the last day I'm there, I turn and I'm so distraught and I look and I'm like, oh, hey, what's up? So I was with this guy so I met him, Frank, and that was October. I was living with him that Christmas in Philadelphia. Now, Dusty, who owned the salon, I said, because I'm making him money. He's like, what are you doing? I said, don't worry, I'm going to come back every month and work. And I did. I could come back once a month, work for 6 days, do like 10 people a day, and make a small fortune for him and for me, and then go back to Philly. But I'm really glad I got to live on the East Coast. But even when I was living there, and then on the weekends, my best friend Michael, who I met in like 85, that's another story. So Michael and I would drive to Palm Springs, and I'd see Jonathan and Hank because they had a place in Palm Springs too. And then I'd fly back to Philly. Now Michael, who's sober 5 years longer than I am, he has stories. So it was 1985. This LGBTQ convention in San Francisco called Living Sober had started, and they were doing a fundraiser at the Grace Cathedral. And so I went up there because I had met some guy that I was dating, this furrier, and worked in Union Square. So I was getting familiar with San Francisco, and it was only an hour away. And so he and I didn't last. Nobody lasted with Steve McCord. And Michael, that's when I met him, because I didn't know Michael was his last one before me, and he was pretty shitty to Michael. And Michael thought I knew, and I had no idea what was going on. He said later on, he goes, I looked at you and thought, you have no idea what's going on here. And I said, I didn't. And so that New Year's Eve was the fundraiser for Living Sober. There was a dance and a meeting, and the meeting was in the sanctuary at Grace Cathedral. And I always love when I see these people walk into meetings a little late. You know, here's this queen. She walks in these skin-tight white jeans, cowboy boots, and a little tank top. Just click, 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 all the way to the front. And then I turned around to make sure everybody saw, because I was that queen. I went, oh, hi, yeah, and then sat down. So Michael and I met, and sort of formally met and hooked up, and then at the end I said, oh, we're going to be sisters, not misters. And so we became really good friends. So we've been friends since then, 41 years. And Michael's, a brother. My twin brother, Jonathan, because we'd go to Palm Springs all the time. We hung out all the time. So Jonathan's like, you guys are more twins than we are. And I said, I know. Even when Michael and I were younger, and, we'd go to places, we got bleached at the same time in the 90s when everybody was bleaching their teeth and this tan and the dark hair, we all looked like, but it was funny. But it's funny because in the 90s too, I buddied up with Farrah, who was my obsession.
Farrah
Fawcett, yeah. Like there's more than one Farrah. So
that's right.
She, the guy who did her hair, Angelo, ended up dying. His assistant, Mela, took over and started doing Farrah's hair and was working upstairs at the salon. I mean, now, where I'm working. And so I knew she was coming in one day because Dusty wanted Mela to bring her in so to give some hype for the salon. And I really hadn't met her formally. I'd seen her with Angelo and stuff, and I saw them one time exchanging stuff. That's all I'll say. And so I knew she was coming in. So she came walking in. She had this leather jacket open with this sort of these torn up jeans, and her hair it's all flawless. I'm just like, shit. And she goes walking upstairs, and I'm like, Mela! She's like, fine. She goes, come on. So I go run upstairs, and I said, hi. She's getting her nails done. I said, hi, I'm David. Nice to meet you. Oh, hi, David. Very sweet. I said, I would tell people I'd go straight for you. She goes, oh, that's so cute. I said, no, really, I will. And so she laughed. And so every time she came to get her hair done, I'd go and I'd hang out, and do all that. And they always wanted me to go with them when they were doing stuff, but I know there's a little too much partying, so I never really went. And she was great. She was really beautiful and sweet and smart. But she was at a time where they didn't allow women to be bright and smart and make their own choices. It was the 70s. They blackballed her, because she wanted a percentage of what she was bringing in, And so, that played out the way it played out. But it was funny because when I turned 60 during the pandemic, and the salons were all closed up, we boarded up, papered up the windows, we were still sneaking girls in. I said, the only thing I can do is I can have a session with my friend, the medium, and I can go have food with my sponsee and his husband out in Boyle Heights. They have a house, and we go sit in the backyard. They were my little circle. You had your own circle during the pandemic of people, those are the only people you saw. So I go sit down to do this session with my friend Armand, and he's like, what's with you and Farrah on your birthday? I go, so nothing, I knew her. He goes, well, she's singing happy birthday to you like Marilyn Monroe did to JFK. And she's, she wants you to find you a boyfriend. And I said, I didn't know that I forgot to tell you this part. So she's coming through and she's letting me know she's trying to find me a boyfriend and everything. But the metaphysical stuff, I should go back to 2001. Well, so Michael is taking care of my dog. In 2001, after my family sort of migrated to Vegas, so I go through the Philadelphia story and all this other stuff's going on, and my niece gets married. I stayed an extra year, even though Frank and I had broken up, and I was going back and forth, and it was like 2000, and my niece got married, my oldest niece, and I saw my twin brother Jonathan at his wedding, and I just sort of was like, he's too skinny. He had gotten too thin, and I know that look. I said, I'm not going to be 3,000 miles away when he dies. So an apartment just happened to become available in the building I'd been living in and staying in through this whole process of going back and forth to the East Coast. My friend Michael lived in that building. He had me come live there. And so I got the apartment, and then a couple weeks after the apartment, I'm back in Philadelphia planning, moving and all that. And my sister Becky calls me. Now, when Becky calls, there's something going on. I'm like, what happened? She goes, are you alone? And I said, no, my roommate's here. She goes, okay. I said, I'm going to get rid of the alone. That's when you had call waiting. So I got rid of the other phone call, and I said, what's going on? She goes, well, there's been a car accident. Aaron and Justin, so it was Becky, Debbie, Rachel. So Debbie's two boys, Aaron and Justin, got into a car accident, and Justin died. So my mother ended up flying all of us to Washington, D.C., because that's where the boys were there. My sister had gotten sober and was with my brother Stephen in San Jose, but the boys were with their father in Washington. And so we all flew out there. And I walked my sister to her son's grave. And, and then, and that was a lot. And then I moved back to Los Angeles. And my twin brother, who was a little sick, got really sick, to the point to where he goes, I feel like I'm looking down the barrel of a gun, David. And the guy I was with, let's just say he wasn't completely honest. And yeah, 15 years sober and 39 years old, one night I was like, that's it. I'm going to kill myself because I'm done. All this shit going on. Because I had no spiritual program. Like being in recovery, it's all about finding a higher power and living a spiritual life. And I was so busy being coast-to-coast hairdresser and looking like $1 million and tan and blue-white teeth. Because Farrah called me once and she's like, David, do you have any bleach? Because we were using this bleach that was getting sold out in Los Angeles. I think it's good in LA, and everybody buys it all up. So she called me from New York because she was going to get some bleaching gel for my teeth. Mella's like, hey, David, Farrah wants to know if you need bleach for your teeth. I said, yes. And I'm like, I've arrived. Farrah's getting me my bleach for my teeth. And it was funny. And, I was so busy being all the outside shit that I'd forgotten, And that night I said, that's it, I'm going to kill myself. I said, you know what? I'm going to get really drunk. I said, well, maybe I should call my sponsor. Now, my sponsor, Don Norman, I got him at like 9 years sober. I was in a meeting, and I've lost every sponsor. Like, some of them died of AIDS. My first one had a blood disease. And then Steve, I moved to Los Angeles, and then I got Bill, and then Bill got sick and died. And then I was with this guy, Anthony Ivory, and then he sort of disappeared and was out. And I go, I'm 9 years sober. I need somebody who's in meetings. And I walk over to this guy, this black gentleman sitting there. I said, can I get your number? Because he was always in the meeting and always looked like he was happy. And he goes, why? I said, well, I need a sponsor. How much time do you have? 9 years. Are you going to be in any trouble? I don't think so. You know, I should have said, well, later on, I'm going to rock some shit up. So I called Don, you know, and he'd been my sponsor for a few years then. And he's like, oh, precious one, which means translated, you stupid bitch, don't do anything. You get on your knees like you prayed like you've never prayed before. So I did. And that night I couldn't stop my head. And I grabbed the Bible my parents were married with, and I got on my knees and I just prayed. And because there's so much grief and stuff I hadn't even begun to deal with. And so the next morning I wake up and I'm like, wow, I couldn't stop my head. And I prayed, okay, well, there's a God, and I have to bring God into my life. I can believe in God and see God, but I have to bring God into my life. So I started talking about what was going on. And like within 4 months, I got 20 new sponsees. Like one came back as one, Carlos I got like in 93. I think I walked into a meeting and I always ask newcomers who they are and what's going on. And I asked him, and then I was going through a breakup and I said, you got a sponsor yet? And he got like, no. I said, I'm it, come on, you're gonna come with me. I have to move and you're gonna help. And that's how it started. It's not like, oh, let me share my light with you. It's like, I'm in pain, but you're new, you're crazy, come with me. And it's funny because he was walking the dogs while I was packing and doing stuff. And my ex-boyfriend was doing a drive-by, and Carlos was like, I'm not fucking him, you know? It's hilarious. And Carlos has been like, you know, he's family now. And so Carlos had been sponsored by Don while I was in Philly. And Don called and said, hey, you're going to go back to David. He's back in town. Click. And Carlos was like, I was passed around like a party bottom. I said, shut up. And we laugh. But so I got all these 20 sponsees because I didn't know you could say no. I'm a wee bit codependent too, which took me a minute. So I have all these new sponsees. But I remember one day I heard a sentence clear as day, you know, and I only had that experience once before in the end of 99 when I decided to break up with Frank and he and I were fighting. And somebody was going to move out, his boyfriend's moving out, and he needed a roommate, where I heard Spirit really loud say, that's what you're going to do. And I even turned to look and see if, it was weird. And I moved out with this guy, John, and lived with him the last year in Philly. Well, this happened again, and it was like, you're going to do things completely differently than you've been doing them before. And I went, okay, got it. It was like clear. And then, you know, and then a couple months, a couple weeks later, Don's like, you can't feel sorry for yourself either about any of this. You know, about the nephew dying or Jonathan getting really sick and all this happening. And I thought, how dare you? And then I thought, oh, if I felt sorry, I wouldn't have taken the right action. If I get stuck in self-pity, I'll, you know, like a cat licking its wounds, I won't move. So I thought, I need a life. I'm going to the gym every day at 7 and I have meetings. So I started a big book study at my house, which I did for the next 19 years. So I had this whole group of people. And even though Don gave me grief about the big book study, it was a few years later that he sent me somebody who wanted to go through the steps. And Don's like, I don't do that, you go to David. So, but there's like a number of people who have over 30 years who were from that original group. You know what I mean? And we learned that book. You know, we learned about recovery, we learned about being of service. And because I was raised by Helen, you know, we cleaned the house top to bottom every Saturday, hospital corners on the beds, our drawers were in order, we dusted the rungs. My mother it was done right. So I have that with a work ethic, which can be challenging to be around, especially if you're having to listen to me. And I was a little rough for a minute. So Don gives me a call and he's like, you have to quit hitting him. I go, hitting who? He goes, your sponsees. I said, they're talking back to me. I come from the generation where if you talk to a guy in a bad way, you better shut up or back it up. So, and also my parents, there was, corporal punishment was legal back then. And, and so I was like, okay, fine, I'll quit hitting him. And But there was time, and I heard about this story for like 20 years. So I was secretary of this big meeting on Saturday night, and I'm working all week in the hair salon, doing hair, all this shit. And so I become secretary of this great big meeting, couple hundred people. And I said, if I'm doing all you sponsors, you're going to come, you're going to take a commitment. I'll give you the commitment you're going to do. And so we did that. So I had like 3 rows of sponsees and the meeting starting, and it was early 2000 something. And I was wearing like True Religion jeans when they were cool, and I had some Steve Madden's half boots on and stuff, and the meeting's starting, and I'm really serious about shut the fuck up when meetings start. Sit down, pee before the meeting, pay attention, don't get up during the speaker, like simple shit. This hour's gonna save your life. When we got sober, it was an hour and a half. We did have a 10-minute break for cigarettes, but all meetings were like an hour and a half, started at 8:30 or 10. We had whatever. So I hear this rumble, and I turn to some of my sponsees a couple rows back, and it's not stopping. I'm like, hey, and it's not really stopping. So I kick off one of my shoes, tell the row behind me, duck, and hit the 2 of them. And I said, give me my shoe, shut the fuck up. And so I heard about that for 20 years. Oh, you're the guy that throws shoes in a meeting. Just like I did it once. I think just once. But I would grab phones out of people's hands and stuff. As you want to live or not? Do you want to live or not? So, that sort of saved my life. That experience with the sponsees and having all of them, because I didn't know what was going to happen next. That was in 2003. I took over the salon that I'd walked in 13 years before, and it wasn't just 2-seater, in the Valley. It was, which is nothing wrong with that, but it was a salon in Beverly Hills. Now I didn't know when Dusty's wife Pamela was telling me when I was going back and forth to Philly, oh my God, you keep us solvent. It went right over my head because I was young and I was chasing and I was having fun and all that. But it wasn't until the first year, and the transition was pretty simple. Because I'm my mother's son, and I'm very organized, and I'm boom, 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 boom. One day it was one, next day it was mine. I had the stationery, the accounts, everything was in order, boom. And so I literally, when I did the payroll the next year and looked at it, I was literally doing $200,000 more than anybody next to me. Like, they really didn't work. I was really keeping the salon alive for a while. And I had the salon for about 4.5, almost 5 years. And then this person took it over from me, Joseph. And I thought, finally, you can make some money, But in 2003, right when I took over the salon, my twin brother got so sick he had to go to Las Vegas to be with my mother. And she had already, when Justin was killed in the car accident, my mother retired. She went to Vegas with my 3 sisters. Becky had gone there with, they had a house there, and then my mother eventually bought a house, a great big house. She thought maybe Debbie's son would come down, Aaron, and all this other, and Debbie was there and all this other stuff. And big house, 5, rooms, master suite, pool, the whole bit. Then it was just too expensive. And then she bought a smaller house. But Jonathan came down during that time, and she got him on his feet, you know what I mean? And we actually did some Reiki on him in 2003. And the lady said, he has a week to decide if he's going to stay here or not. And he did. He stayed for 3 more years. But in 2001, my friend Michael, going back to this, was taking care of my dog because my mother took my sister Debbie, who lost her son, and myself, and we all went to Europe. And the only time I've been to Europe, I went to Amsterdam. I met them in Amsterdam, Florence, and then Saint-Tropez. Great trip. Amazing. We in Amsterdam. My mother's, because she was an AIDS educator on Clinton's advisory board. Once she started working, she and my dad would go on these trips for, a couple of weeks. They'd go to, here, and they go to Spain for, everything. Her itinerary was always perfect. Start the morning here, do lunch here, evening here, whatever. And so we went there, and Michael was taking care of my dog. I had this black flat coat retriever named Buck. My niece had the mother and father. They had I got one from them a litter later the next year or so. I had a second one. But Michael couldn't sleep one night, Oh, no, I know. We had just left Saint-Tropez, and Jonathan called my phone to leave a message, and Michael answered. He goes, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know anybody was there. He goes, yeah, no problem. He couldn't go back to sleep, turns on the TV, sees this medium named Tim Braun. And Tim, and he told me, he goes, I went and saw Tim and all this other stuff and blah, 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 blah. I said, I want to go. So I don't really believe in any of it. And little did I know I've already experienced some of it, but I go down there and I'm driving and I'm scared. I call Don. He goes, well, you don't have to go. And I said, no, I have to. So I get there and I'm sitting there like this.
This is in L.A.?
L.A., yeah. Tim Braun. He's in Costa Mesa at the time, I think. And I'm crossing my arms and I'm like, he goes, do you have a scar? I said, no. He goes, was there abuse? And I went, and then he went on, he goes, your father can't even talk about that time in your life. He needs you to send him forgiveness. And then he went on all this other stuff, and I was like, oh, this shit's real. And then at the end of it, he goes, your dad was psychic and didn't know what to do with it. I said, that makes sense because he always could clock us. He was always like, and we're like, do you have eyes in the back of your head? And your mother's family is really intuitive and all that energy came into you. And I said, well, what does that mean? He goes, you're going to get more psychic. I said, I didn't say anything because I didn't know. I'm not going to be rude to a stranger. And I went, So I didn't say anything. And then my intuition started to get really strong. Like I'd have the book studies and I'd sit down and one night I was exhausted. It was a Friday night because I do it Friday nights. And I was like, God, I am so tired. I don't know if I could do this. And I heard something say, well, then let us. And I was like, what? So what we do is we read the book and then I'd comment on what their interpretation was and whatever. And that night I was on it. And one of my sponsors, Craig, was like, God, you were on it tonight. So I'm going to tell you how I did it. He's like, yeah. I said, well, I asked God to step in and take care of it. And it was pretty cool. And then, and I started seeing Tim and pretty regularly. And then I got my whole family. So, it was a year after my brother died. And so, well, I can't just jump to that. So Jonathan got sicker and sicker, and then he got better, and my mother said, I didn't get you better to watch you die. So she got him out and into his own apartment in the same complex as my sister Rachel with her 2 kids. So he was there. So I'd always see him when I go to Vegas and stuff like that. And then, he just got really, really sick. And one time I went to, he didn't come for Mother's Day, And so I said, Mom, we're going to go over there and see how he is. So we walk in, and he was, and I looked at the condition of the bathroom and the house and everything, and I was like, went over and I said hello. John was very proper. He had a houseman 2 or 3 times a week in Laguna Beach. He had 1,000 thread count, $1,000 sheets on his bed. I mean, it was ridiculous. He and Hank had a lifestyle. So to see the apartment sort of like this, I was like, Because, his partner, Hank, couldn't even see his mother getting sick and dying. Hank had lost so many friends from AIDS. Like and he was a practicing alcoholic. He just couldn't deal with feelings and emotions. So, and Jonathan was pretty shitty to him on the phone too at times. So he was just mad that he was there. And Jonathan was an untreated alcoholic. He never got sober. I took him the books once in the 90s. I said, we're having lunch. He was by the salon. I said, because they have we're still up in Los Angeles. I said, here's the books. I said, we're a lot alike. He goes, no shit, David. And I said, okay, salad or sandwich? I think I'm just going to have a salad. Never said it again. He went to Al-Anon, but still never. So there was a lot of his life was based on untreated alcoholism and the choices and stuff. So, at this point, that Mother's Day, that Monday, I just went to, Mom and I went in there and I just said hi to him. And then I went into the kitchen and I found some cleaning stuff. And I said, Mom, I said, Jonathan, I said, I'm just going to clean for you a little bit. He goes, okay, Dave, thanks. So I cleaned the bathroom a little bit, and then I went and cleaned the kitchen a little bit. And then as my mom and I were leaving, and then sat and visited, and my mom and I were leaving, she was like, Jonathan's always had such a hard regimen. Because at one point in the 90s, early 90s, I was in Laguna Beach with him, and I would go visit on Sundays because he'd call me, and I could hear the sadness in his voice. Because his partner was drinking. And Jonathan's like, what are you doing this weekend? And I said, I'm going to come and see you. He goes, oh, that'd be great. And I'm so glad I did that because I never hesitated spending time with him. And so I said, Mom, and I asked him one time when we were in Laguna Beach, and they had separate bedrooms because Jonathan liked the dogs on the bed and Hank didn't. So Jonathan's bedroom was downstairs, Hank was upstairs. And I asked him, how many pills are you taking a day? And he goes, there was 80 pills he was taking at one point. And I was like, oh my God. And I started crying, and without even a blink, he just goes, grabs the tissues here. He was so like, whatever, David. And, and so it was a lot. And so he's, there's a couple times where I just happened to be near him when he had a grand mal seizure and got him, to the hospital, and the paramedics in Laguna Beach were laughing because he had soiled himself. And then he came out of the seizure and was starting to be coherent and was trying to take his clothes off, and they're laughing. And I look at him, I go, what the fuck is so funny here? I said, Hank, give me his clothes. Come on. And then, at the emergency room, the head guy came in and started to apologize. And I was looking straight at Jonathan. I said, too little, too late, I don't give a shit. Because I'd gone through that shit forever, and it wasn't over then. So I just didn't give a shit, because you're uncomfortable, you're going to laugh, you're a paramedic, really? If I could fucking throat punch you right here and get away with it, I would. But, I just wanted to make sure Jonathan was okay. And so we were leaving, and Mom's like, oh, he's done that. I said, no, Mom, you were just uncomfortable with what you just saw. So we get to her, and I drop her off. She goes, I'm just concerned about you leaving like this. And I said, I'm fine. You're just uncomfortable with what you just saw with your son. That's on you, not me. This is after that, my sister Debbie, who was working at the Wynn Hotel and living in Vegas and stuff, there too also, all three girls were there, they started going over every week and making sure he was okay, because everybody's out living their life. And I'm like, he's over here dying and nobody's over there. You know what I mean? But he would do stuff to push everybody away, and they would pay attention to it. I know when somebody's pushing somebody away, they still need something. There's something about going through the AIDS epidemic. It's a rough teacher. I don't waste time. I say what I think. I love somebody, they know it. If they need something, they get it. I go, whatever I need to do, it happens, period. And at a young age, I learned that. It was a horrible but valuable lesson. I went through something that most people don't go through till they're 80, losing everybody. And it just makes you live a certain way. And so, I came home and I told my friend Michael, I said, we're going to go clean Jonathan's apartment. It's a mess. It's nasty. So we went there and cleaned everything and washed all the sheets and the towels, and, and he was so happy. Remember I sat down, he's like, thanks, Dave. And I said, you're welcome. And it was a month or so later, I had met some guy, Johnny, at this Florida roundup. And we came to Vegas to visit and stuff. And Jonathan never liked any of my boyfriends. He was always like, what's this one? Although I used to date box dancers in the 90s, and I bring these strippers, and Jonathan was just like, they pull out the Playboy bunny to put where they're tanning, and Jonathan's like, really, David? I said, shh. But he was getting really sick, and I remember saying to him, I said, we're probably going to have to put you in hospice. And I could hear him almost say, bullshit. I'm going to basically hear. We could do talk without talking. My brother Stephen used to get mad because we'd be talking. Even when Jonathan was really sick one time in Laguna Beach, he was in the hospital. He and I started looking at each other like, yeah. He's saying to her, yeah. And Steve's like, you're doing it again. And we're like, what? He goes, you're talking and leaving me out. We're not even saying anything. He goes, that's just it. So, I'm back in the salon in Los Angeles, and I get a call. Jonathan's gone in the hospital. This is pretty much it. So I call Michael, and I said, Michael, we have to go. He's like, okay. So I pick him up, and we drive to Vegas, and it's a Thursday night, and I go straight to the hospital, and I see him, and hey, hi, honey. I'm gonna come spend the night with you tomorrow night. And he goes, okay. I said, I love you too. And the next morning I called him. I said, hey, how you doing? He goes, I'm all right. I said, okay. I said, I'll see you in a little bit. He goes, okay. A couple hours later, he slipped into a coma. So Michael and I get there, and I brought a pillow because I didn't know where I was going to be sleeping. And I look at the bed, and I think, I could probably fit in that. I said, okay, Michael, come here. Because he had started to lean. So I got in the bed next to him, and I got on my side, and I put the pillow here, and I held his head up a little bit. And then I put my hand down, and I had the pillow behind me, and I said, Michael, pull up that rack so I don't roll off this bed. And I put my thumb down. Even though he was in a coma, he grabbed my thumb, and he just held on to it. And Michael was on the other side of the bed, and he held his hand. See, Michael he got sober at 18 in San Francisco, or in Hawaii, and then was in San Francisco. We can't even count the people we watched die. So Michael sat there, and it was sort of like a healing thing for him as he processed, and he loved Jonathan, and Jonathan loved him. And I just held him there, and I said, I was here when you came into the world, and I'll be here when you go. And I'm just glad that I'm sober and I get to be that guy. You know what I mean? So it was time to go. My sister Debbie came, and she's the one who lost her son. And she had told Jonathan, hey, when you're ready to go, I'll do it with you. You can do it with me, because she couldn't be there when her son died. So she got there that night, and I'd gone back to my sister Becky's house. And we're sitting there, and we get the call from Debbie. And Debbie's like, Jonathan's gone. And so we're all in shock, and Becky and Michael and I, we get in my car, we drive over to my mother's house, and my mother's just sitting in the chair like this. And I go over and I get on my hands and my knees in front of her. And I understand wailing now. I never understood people wailing over people. But the phone, my sister Becky was on the phone, and I could hear her say, Mom's here with David. And he said, and we eventually pulled it together, and Debbie came over, and she and Mom drove, and Michael and I drove to the hospital to say goodbye to him, say goodbye to his body. And my niece Katie came too. And Katie had been my assistant when I had the salon, in the early on, and I taught her how to do hair, because she was doing her hair and makeup one day, and I was like, oh, you should do hair that for a living. She said, I said, oh, what do I know? I just have a salon in Beverly Hills. Why would you listen to me? She's like, I said, exactly, lady. So months later, Uncle David, I said, just get your license. You can come work for me. So she did. And she came, and I taught her everything. But then, she was there almost a year, and her sister had the second baby, and she just missed her family, and her apartment flooded with, she has a ground floor apartment, and it flooded with sewage and all that shit. So it's literally, and she was like, I just want to go back to Vegas. I said, I get it. Go ahead and go. So I said, but you're going to start with, these are your clients, because my sister Becky would call me, I have roots, when are you coming? So I have to go, my mother, my three sisters, and my nieces, Katie and Shannon. They all have hair, this ton of hair. Here's your clientele, start with them, here's the formulas. Go have a good time. So, Katie came in because she was really close to John. John was really close with the kids when they were little. Like, we'd go take them out on outings when they're little and do all kinds of things. Like, our nieces and nephews are like ours. We spoiled the shit out of them. For years, we were buying them designer clothes and crazy shit, like only gay uncles could. And I think every little girl should have a gay uncle. I taught them how to put on lipstick. I'm like, come here, lips. To the point to where Shannon's little girl walked up to Katie once, goes, Tia, lips. I look at that. My sister Becky goes, that's all you. And I said, and thank God. So we all say goodbye. We're all there, and we say goodbye, and we're leaving the hospital. And my sister Debbie points to my car. And I had the car about a year. It was a 5 Series BMW. And she goes, isn't that his monogram? And it's the license plate said 5 JPM. Yeah, he's the sixth kid, and it said 5 JPM. That's weird, And 2 years later, I got a note from the dealership that wasn't even the right license plate with the VIN. And they sent me a different license plate a couple years later. So that was the first little, like, that's weird. I get home, I take my keys out of my pocket and I put them on the futon. And I get on my knees to pray, and I start praying. Because I've done that since I got sober. I can't go to bed without getting on my knees, and I get up and I get on my knees. Not for God, because I think God can hear a prayer anywhere. But it's more for me. And I lay down on the bed, and it's July in Vegas. It was July 22nd, 2006, and I'm lying there, and I'm just like, ugh. And I was exhausted. And then I hear this car alarm going off. Jesus Christ, fucking car alarm. And my brother-in-law walks in and goes, David, your car alarm's going off. And I'm like, what? My what? I didn't even know I had a car alarm. And then I'm walking downstairs. I'm like, oh, that's right. Spirit can play. Because all this stuff with Tim and the medium stuff, I've learned different things. And spirit can play with electricities and lights and shit like that. And so I'm thinking about that, and I'm laughing. I'm laughing and I'm crying. Then I go back upstairs. And I lay down. And then the fan on the bed's like, I said, okay, I get it. You're here. I go turn on the light, and I go hit the switch, and I dream vividly every night. It's part of my gift. And I forgot my grandpa had come to me 3 weeks before and said, we're taking Jonathan because of his HIV. It didn't even dawn on me. It didn't really register. So all that went down, and then, I started to get more and more intuitive. And I ignored it as long as I could, But Jonathan was gone. I went back to work. I had a full salon of people. The good thing is it kept me busy, and then I got rid of the salon, and Joseph took it over, and all this other stuff happened. And then, 2008, in July, I booked 3,000 to 4,000 that week. And then that December, I booked 4,000. I lost 3/4 of my cash flow. Like, when everything fell apart, it fell apart. And I ended up losing the condo the next year and had to go work for Joseph. We have a salon at the Beverly Hills Hotel. I said, but everybody lost a lot. I got in my paid-for BMW in a suit and drove to the Beverly Hills Hotel and did some hair, puff, puff. People had nothing. It wasn't lost on me. I knew I was lucky to have a skill that is almost recession-proof. Everybody always needs their hair done, and they'll always spend money on it. And something I love, and I'm able to work. So that happened, and then lost the condo, with their work. And then I did declare bankruptcy because of the debt that I had based on that other income. And I had to pay it back because the laws changed, and you had to pay back $1,000 a month. So while I'm building in clientele, I'm paying. So it's like all this stuff was going on. But I'd already gone through the worst thing. I'd already buried my twin. Everything else after that was a situation. And so, I'm still going to meetings. I still sponsor a ton of people. I'm still, being sponsored, still working a spiritual life. And then it starts to smooth out a little bit. And I find I have a great apartment in West Hollywood, rent controlled. That was 2009 when everybody left town. So in 2010, I was at the Beverly Hills Hotel doing some hair. And the girl I had just done, she and her sister, like 6 weeks before. And I said, honey, where's Brenna? She goes, oh, she died. I said, what? Because she had a brain tumor. They'd taken it out. The gray hair was growing in. I did her hair. She took herself off her medication a little too quick, and she had a seizure and died. So I said, I talked to her. I said, I'm so sorry. I started talking. So I sat down, in recovery, we talk about our stories so somebody else can relate and not feel alone. So I told her, this is what happens when you lose somebody close. People say the wrong thing. They do the wrong thing. The people you don't expect are going to show up or will show up. The people you thought would show up don't show up. And you're on your own, pretty much, in a lot of ways. So we started talking about that. Then I stood up and I started doing her hair, putting her base on. And all of a sudden she's like, she goes, what? And I said, I can feel your sister. And then I started doing, and then I went white. And she's like, what happened? I said, I can hear her. And that's the first time that I had the medium experience. And she's like, what's the message? So I just told her the message. And I'm like, shit. So I went to this guy, Bill Burns. He's dead, so I can use his last name. And he said, I said, I had this experience. He was sober a long time and a psychic, and he goes, no, I've been watching you, I know. And I said, okay. So we'll put that on the side for a minute. And then, and then it started to smooth out. And then my mom got sick in 2014. My niece got sick first with cancer, Katie. And then my mom got sick the next year. And then my mom died in 2016. And I went to see this medium, Austin, who I'd seen in 2013. And Austin, at one point, she was almost crying. I said, what's wrong? She goes, well, usually people come here with such regret, but your dad has shown me what a beautiful son you are to your mother. I said, I love my mother. I mean, I love her. Of course, I'm going to give her everything I can give her. And so when I saw her in 2016 after my mom died, it was the whole thing. And because we had moved my mother out of her home into assisted living. And I spent 2 days putting the room together. These ladies were like, oh my God, because my brother Stephen came and, and he basically got rid of a lot of stuff and moved stuff around, and we decided what was going to go into the place. And even when signing her up in this place in Las Vegas, by this time my brother knows that I'm a witch. He's been around me when I'm like, and they're like, what the fuck? And my sister Becky had never seen it happen. But actually a year after my brother died, Shannon's second girl, Logan, wasn't walking, talking, and never been to Jonathan's house. And basically they took Jonathan's bedroom and put it in one of Becky's bedrooms in the house in Las Vegas. And Logan walked by and said, Nona, that's Uncle Johnny's room. And we said, Nona, baby, that's Uncle David's room. She goes, no, it's Uncle Johnny's room. So Becky calls me and she goes, and they had heard the tape from me, Tim telling me that I'm going to be, clairvoyant. And they're like, well, we got another one. And little Logan, was already talking to Jonathan in the other room. So we're like, okay, well, we weren't afraid of it because it's the dialogue we have in the family. And my brother has a little bit of, my older brother, Stephen, has a little bit of intuition. So I'm here, Stephen's here, Becky's there, and this lady's here. And then she starts talking about us and her family. We're signing her into this, thing. And we're like, well, this has happened, that happened, blah, blah, blah. And then she goes, yeah. She goes, I asked her, how long have you been here? Because where are you from? I said, I heard her voice. A lot of my friends are Southern, so I know the voice. I like them because they're polite. They know how to behave. My best friend Michael's Southern. My Carlos's husband Jason's from Georgia. And I just said, she goes, well, I'm from blah, blah, blah. And I came here, I lost my mother, father, and son within like a couple of years. And the minute she said that, all of a sudden they all popped up right over here. And I was literally, like, her father was there, mother wouldn't come near me, father pushed her son to me, and the son was like, and wouldn't leave me alone. And I'm just like, they're all in spirit, and I'm just like, oh. And I go, I made a noise, and my brother's like, what? And I'm just like, nothing. And he's laughing because he knows what's about to happen. And I asked her, do you believe in spirits? I thought, we're not going to get signed in here. And she's like, why? I said, well, I'm a little intuitive, and I got to tell you, when you said that, your mother, your father, and your son came in. Your mother's over there. She won't come near this. Your father's over here, but your son won't leave me alone. Because she had, I know. She was talking about her son. She goes, yeah. And when she was talking about him, and then all of a sudden I went, Appalachian Mountains. And everybody's like Tourette's. And then she starts talking about her son and blah, blah. In the end, she goes, yeah, he died in a helicopter crash in the Appalachian Mountains. And then she just looked at me. And we didn't put that together till I started saying this minutes later. I said, well, he has a message. Can I tell you? She's like, yes. So I started talking to her. But I don't ever remember what the message is and stuff. Well, we finally got Mom in there. But my mother's still in the hospital, and I'd gone to see her to say goodbye. And I wasn't going to be there when they moved her into the assisted living. And I should just give her a hug and say goodbye. But that day, I literally grabbed her face. And I gave her a circle of kisses. I grabbed her face and I just gave her a circle of kisses. And I held her for a minute and hugged her. And then I walked away, and I felt like the air went out of my lungs. And I later on found out that was my twin brother making sure that I said goodbye to Mom. because they can see the timeline of things happening. And we got my mother into assisted living. She was there 4 days, had a massive heart attack, and died. I'm like, really, Helen? It took me 2 days to put that room together. And 4 days, whatever. So when I went to go see Austin, she told me the whole thing. My mother basically didn't want to grow old and fall apart and die. She goes, it's not her style to fall apart and look ugly. But whatever, Helen. So at the end of it, I said, is this stuff going to go away? Because I've been playing with it, and all my clients, when I'm doing hair, by this point, I'm giving them free readings when they're coming in and talking to their dead relatives and the whole shit. It's hilarious, And she goes, no. I said, well, can you teach me how to work with it? She's like, yeah. So I worked with her for like 3 years, and I said, I'll do your hair and you teach me. And she needed me. She didn't know how good I was because of her, whatever. She had good hair. They didn't know what to do with it. That happens a lot. But it was interesting because, during the pandemic, my sponsor, Don, got really sick. He had COPD. He was on oxygen and stuff. And I didn't do anything. I was really clear, for a minute. He goes, you're not even doing anything. Carlos and him were talking about how I was just staying home all the time. And I'm like, well, I'm your liaison. I'm not going to bring anything to you. So the day he died, August 20th of 2020, we were working outside the salon. They let us work outside the salon finally. And I'm working underneath the tent in the back of the salon in Beverly Hills. And I started at 8 in the morning, and Austin was my first client, had that appointment for weeks. And that's the day that Dawn died. And she came in, and she sat down, and I started putting on her collar. I said, Dawn died today. She goes, oh, honey, I'm so sorry. She goes, oh, he's funny. I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, he's here. He laughed at me and said, really, we're going to do this already. He died at like at 1:30 in the morning. It's 8 o'clock. We're going to do this already. Because I had told him, I said, you can make fun of this. He used to, all that woo-woo stuff. Don was a black gay man who got sober in Los Angeles off Skid Row. He, no joke, did not pull a punch, was very clear, very spiritual, but he didn't really believe in metaphysics. And I'm like, I don't care if people believe or not, but I'll be the bitch you come talk to. Well, I was. And he mentioned these other people I knew that nobody else would know, Aloma and this guy Ralph Burns and stuff. And ever since then, he's been literally right here. Like, I'll be sitting with sponsees sometimes, and I just want to rip him. And he's just like, I'm like, thank you for that, because that's not me. And, and that was the year that when, we were locked up in December because there was that whole surge again. And Farrah came through because I didn't know that, because Armand said she can hear me every time I talk to her, because I drive by her old house and she had such a hard time in the end. And I said, if you ever need help with Redmond, you just let me know. You put him in front of me, I'll help him with whatever you need. And I just say, so yeah, every time you talk to her, she can hear you. They can hear what's going on. And when she came through and was trying to, trying to find me a boyfriend and trying to do this, you never look up, you da-da-da-da. And, and it's funny because I'm surrounded by people who are intuitive. Like my friend Michael's really intuitive, and I have a roommate now who's really intuitive. Because you can't really do your own readings. I can communicate, but I can't do my own readings. And she's even come through with a roommate, and I was worried about money with time, and she's patting your head, saying, "Oh, that's cute. You're always going to be fine," and stuff. So it's nice to know that I have so much help from spirit. Do you know what I mean? But what happened too is Katie got sick, Mom got sick, Mom died. 3 years later, Katie got really, really sick, and she passed away. 39. And those kids are like my kids, And then we had a pandemic. And then Dawn died. And then we finally got back to work. And then 2 years later, during the pandemic, a group of my sponsees put together this You Are the Company You Keep meeting on Zoom. It's still going on. And one of my sponsees, Kirk, I can tell he was obviously having a hard time, and he came back and forth. And even when we were able to see each other, I had him try to come stay with me so I could take him through the steps, because he had relapsed, obviously, and there's some stuff going on. But then he stopped even showing up for that. And then in May of 2022, he took his life. I talked to him that night, and he had just been detoxed from all these pills. And I just sort of said, he goes, will you still sponsor me? Kirk, I was his godfather at the St. Thomas Episcopal Church in Hollywood, and I've been working with him for 22 years. I said, of course, but just quit fucking lying to me. Tell me whatever's going on. And that night, it was just too much for him because he literally wrote a note, had dinner with his mother, got in some Mercedes and drove to the 5 and the 14 off ramp and jumped. And the next morning after my meeting, I'm sitting there and I get a call from Carlos. And it was about a week or so after that, I just wasn't right. No, all that stuff that I just talked about, from losing my twin brother to losing all that to all this other stuff, none of it I really processed. I just keep on moving through it. And I woke up and I was just like, I'm not right. So I started praying and meditating. First I was playing games on my phone. And then I thought, well, I know what I like. I'll turn my lease in, I'll get a new car. That'll fix it. So I did, and then I found out I was spending too much money on the games on my phone, so I got all those things off my phone, and I got a new SUV. And I started praying and meditating like a newcomer, like meditating every day and the whole bit. And I stood up one day, and Spirit was like, you're going to do EMDR. And I was like, what the hell is that? I didn't know what that was. And also I started this grief recovery handbook written by 2 sober guys. So I started doing that book with one of my sponsees who had a very similar thing. And it's, when you bottle that much grief up, I mean, you heard. And you have to know too, I've had a fabulous life. I don't sit in the sidelines. I don't sit here and boo-hoo-hoo. I have a good time. I went out 2-3 times a week until I was about 40. And I was like, I just got to sit down because I'm done with clubs. So I've lived because I watched people dying. It hasn't been just about loss. It's about tremendous spiritual growth and amazing relationships within recovery with people that I've tried to help not die. So at this point, I'm just like, I post something. I have this miniature Australian Shepherd because the boy that I met from New Orleans, eventually he moved in with me. He moved out. I said, I'm keeping, the dogs stay. You're gone in 2 days. Those dogs are staying. There's too many Aussies, Rosie and Hondo. Hondo was a nickname for my brother. I said, I'm naming a dog after you, but you're going to have to deal with it. So, because 4 years after he died, he said, write a book. And I'm sitting there with Tim, and Tim's like, what book? I said, a book about gay twins. And then, I need to do another rewrite now, but it's now about just the twins and the AIDS epidemic because there's not many people left alive that are able to talk about it, that were actually there. And I was present. And you heard my mother and my father, the way they lived life. I don't sit on the sidelines. If you need help, I'm going to help you. So, I just sort of, I was a mess for a minute. So I post this thing about Hondo. Rosie had died at 14 and a half. He was 16, I said, or 15 at the time. And I said, he's been with me through all this stuff. And I posted it on Facebook. And somebody says, well, this is where I went for grief. And this is where my therapist. And when I finally got a hold of the lady and she said, FaceTime me. And I FaceTimed her. And I said, intuitively, I go, oh, this is the woman that's going to help me. And when I drove to the city of Orange from Los Angeles, which is, a good hour, people are like, oh my God. I said, I don't care. I was driving by liquor stores, 37 years sober and 61 years old, nervous. And I thought, oh, this is alcoholism. Just like it happened at 15 when I was like, I'm out of here. So it took a minute, to feel better. But when my brother Jonathan told me to write the book, every time I'd start to write, he'd pop the trunk and roll down the windows and do all kinds of stuff. Like, I'm writing, somebody else just died, I'm a little distraught. Jesus Christ. So I start working with this lady, and there's like the next, and that 22, when I just started doing it, my sister Rachel had gotten cancer earlier in 2022. And we started talking because we hadn't talked when my mother died. My sister Debbie had a relapse. My sister Rachel was still using. I thought, my sponsor Carlos goes, you didn't just lose your mother, you lost your mother and your two sisters, because they saw it all. And I thought, I can't, you know what I mean? And then Debbie ended up being homeless for a few years. We just found her last year. She was in homeless places because she had lost her sobriety and then went back and forth from Vegas to Washington and then just became homeless in San Francisco. She was in a couple shelters, but now she's living with her son in Washington and doing better. I thought she was going to be dead. I thought we were going to get the call. We found her body. So it's a better ending to that story. Rachel, unfortunately, got cancer and she had a colostomy bag and stuff at the wedding. And I'd sent her makeup to do her face. And I hadn't really talked. I mean, we've been talking on the phone, but I hadn't seen her since my mom's for 6 years. So I sent her a makeup kit because she needed makeup. So at this point, Carlos and Jason, Carlos said, he just looked at me. Jason's like, David just ain't right. He just ain't right. We got to go with him. He ain't right. So they did. They babysat me. They really took care of me. And went with me to Gilroy to do my niece's wedding because there was going to be a lot of partying and stuff. And I hadn't been around a lot of alcohol in a long time. And so we get there and I see Rachel and I'm like, oh my God, you did your face. And her kids were sitting around her and I said, oh my God, you look beautiful. And we just hugged. And then we just started crying because we hadn't seen each other, And it was good to see her. And then I went and sat down and there was the wedding. And then after the wedding, there was a reception. And then she came up to me and she goes, are we okay? And I said, what do you mean? You and I, are we okay? We're good? I said, for the rest of our lives. It's the last conversation we ever had. The next year, she got much sicker, didn't tell anybody. She went in the hospital on a Monday. She was dead by Thursday. I didn't even get a chance to go to Vegas to see her. I called her, she was going one room to the other, and she was like, I can't talk, I can't breathe. And that was it. So I had another session with Armand, and she was too sick. She wanted nobody else to see her like that. And then at the end of it, he goes, you got another dog. I said, oh, no, I'm going to wait till he dies. I'm going to get a bonded pair. Blah, 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 blah. He goes, nope, you're getting another dog. I said, oh, that's right. I messaged this woman on Facebook about this yellow lab, this beautiful yellow female lab. I'm like, oh, my God. So I text her after that. No comment. Two days later, I'm like, so what's the story of the dog? A lot of promises, no commitment. I said, what do you want? $800, $100 deposit. I said, okay, Venmo or Zelle. Zelle, okay, she's yours. I was like, that was easy. So I go downstairs, and now my brother, plays with my car by popping the back hatch of the car down. And I go downstairs, and the back hatch of the car is open, and I'm like, thank you, Jonathan. And as I was, I went and picked her up on Mother's Day of 2023 with my friend Victor, who I work with. And I had the old man and the young one, and he fell asleep on the back of her, and it was just sweet. But I was driving to work like 6 months later, and Jonathan came in really clear. He says, remember Uncle Frank's dog, yellow female lab named Kate, that my brother Jonathan ran up to when we were little. He hugged her. She bit him. Uncle Frank put her to sleep. He was working out the karma with that dog by bringing Annie to me. And Annie's been my soul dog. She's called the Dudley Lab. They have a pink nose and green eyes. And she's gorgeous, but she's literally, I had her 6 days and I was in this chair, this big chair and ottoman, with my big TV, because I'm that dude. And I'm eating dinner and I started crying about Rachel. And this 6-month-old dog I've had for 6 days looks at me, climbs on the chair next to me, this is what killed me. She took her butt, turned around, pushed me over, looked me right in the face and went, and then put her head on the armrest. And I'm like, oh, whatever you want for the rest of your life. She's probably thinking, this chair and ottoman, which I don't even get in anymore, it's hers. Because every time I would hold her and get in it, I'd get out and she's in it. And that was the beginning of my soul starting to heal. And I spent 2.5 years doing trauma work because I was physically, mentally, verbally, and sexually abused by the time I got to recovery. And the sexual I didn't know till I was 18 years sober, sitting in therapy. I thought, oh, that was rape. And then it defined my behavior till I got sober with all those men, and all this stuff that I've dealt with, and it was like cleaning house one more time. And it's been amazing, and I realized too, is like my elders in recovery never talked about this stuff. They never talked about how they got through what they got through. They just said, oh, we got on the other side of it. And I'm like, how? And now there's so much, we didn't have a dialogue about trauma 10 years ago. And when I got sober, they were just talking about depression. Everybody had opinions about medication. Well, let me tell you, a lot of people need to be on medication to be chemically right so they can hear about, the recovery. And it's just interesting because now I'm like, I'm fantastic. I'm the best I've ever been. And it hasn't been, and there's a lot more stories in between all of that because there's 41 years of living. But, I'm a very fortunate man to be sitting here clean and sober and want to be, this last year I was so grateful just for my life and my perspective. I have a sponsor he got sober at 24. She's 50, coming up on 51 years, And she's amazing. She doesn't pull a punch. But it's, I go to a lot of meetings. I go to a meeting every day. And not because, I really, no, I don't want to sometimes, but I do it because that's what has to happen. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of new people that need help. And I've trained a whole group of people that now know how to take people through the steps, but I'm still getting a younger crop to do that with because the younger ones, unfortunately, think they have some information. I'm like, aren't you sitting here brand new and your life's in the toilet, but you have some information? Really? Really? So it's amazing sometimes, and it's social media and the arrogance and ego, and we didn't grow up being self-promoting. Matter of fact, you did not promote yourself. You were just, my dad used to say, some great sayings. Leave it the way you found it, leave it better than you found it, leave it good for the next guy, do it if somebody's watching you, even if they're not, you know what I mean? My mother showed me how to be an activist in the world. So I had great stuff, a lot of bad stuff. But I got to tell you, I've changed the narrative with everything. They had 6 kids in 6 years. I had a 6-month-old dog and a 16-year-old dog. And after 7 months, when I put the old man to sleep, I thought, I don't know how parents do it. That tired. And then you have to go into the world and not kill people. I don't know my parents, new respect for parents, and those aren't even kids, those were dogs. You know what I mean? So, life's pretty good. And, I sort of promised my brother I'd finish the book this year. And the minute I said that, I went downstairs. I have a new X3, and it doesn't have a sunroof, but the moon roof was completely open. It was in the morning because I still take Annie to the dog park every day, but not the great big one. I take her to a closer one. And all the windows were down, and I'm like, what the hell? Oh, you heard me. Because he's pushing me to do this. So I will do it, because there's so many stories within all of that the world doesn't know that they need to know. What happened during the AIDS epidemic, and not just that, and even in my family, Dad said, I said, I'm gonna write about your sexuality too, Dad. He goes, if it'll help anybody, because, he had to live his life, I'm glad he married my mom and had us kids, you know what I mean? But there's so much that people don't really know about it. They don't know exactly what happened. And through and I got to do hair in Beverly Hills for the last, how many years? Around everybody. I've turned down every rich gay man in the late 80s and early 90s because I thought, no more sugar daddies, David. The richest ones, drive by the Hilton thinking that fucking thing could have been mine, you know what I mean? It's just hilarious, and but it's all going to go in the book because people need to understand. And when I started to do this, I had this spiritual lesson 25 years ago when I wanted to kill myself. And I thought, to look at me, you wouldn't think anything's wrong. I was 39, I looked great, I was 225, fit, whatever. And I wanted to kill myself. What's going on with everybody else? And because I didn't really know I knew, but I can tell when people aren't telling me the whole story. I'm a hairdresser. And I would ask people in the salon, in meetings, wherever, I said, what's going on? And they're like, oh, nothing. I said, no, really, tell me. And then I did what you're doing. I just sat and listened. And I realized the world is going through something. And that was 25 years ago. Everybody has a story. In fact, it's much more interesting than fiction. But now it's interesting because I got so fat during the pandemic because I get nervous, I cook. And I'm a good cook. And I cook way too much, and I have pan of lasagna, come over get it. I have some enchiladas, come get it. I have mac and cheese, come get it. Because I didn't have room for it, And so I had to go speak in front of a group of people in 2024, and I thought, I'm not going there fat. Those queens are not going to see me fat. So I got rid of all this junk food. I mean, not good food, pies, whatever. And then at the end of 2024, it was like 2 years after doing EMDR, and I said, I'm not eating emotionally anymore. Because when you get sober, you don't have your regular vices. So it's been interesting to have this evolution of growth, and I think it's important to share so that people can learn too. Because there's not many of me left in my community. There's not many 65-year-old gay men sober left. Yeah, it's interesting. I never thought I'd get here.
You're a rarity.
I'm blessed. It's a lot of grace. I should be dead. I really should be dead, but I'm not.
All right.
Thank you.
David, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Incredible story. We'll do another one when you're finished with the book. When I was designing the first Soft White Underbelly book, I realized that there were so many great portraits that weren't going to make it into that book. They just wouldn't fit. And once I saw how well that first book sold, I knew I'd have to design a second book. This second book is finally ready to ship. Like the first one, this book has a collection of some of the best portraits from Soft White Underbelly, accompanied by a quote from that person's interview. This book features another group of Rebecca portraits, as well as a collection of color images of the Whitaker family, and plenty of others. You can order yours for $125 or $150 for a signed copy at softwhiteunderbelly.org. Again, like the first book, once this book is sold out, I will not be printing more of them. The portraits are what Soft White Underbelly is all about, and these two books contain the best of all that work. Thank you for watching.